The first time. I met Brandon for the first time on an early autumn morning, when the campus was still bathed in golden sunlight as soft and warm as honey. Our university sat in a small town on the west coast, quiet enough to hear leaves falling, yet lively enough that the dramas of youth never ran dry. My name is Oliver, a sophomore majoring in communications, and if you asked anyone at school about me, they'd probably use words like heartthrob, perfect, or that guy who always smiles like he is in a toothpaste commercial. It sounds flattering, but honestly it felt more like a frame than a compliment. People were so used to me being fine that no one ever noticed when I wasn't. That morning, I arrived at class earlier than usual, not because I was studious but because I had broken up with my ex 2 days before, and the dorm had started to feel suffocating. I needed fresh air. I needed somewhere I didn't have to pretend I wasn't hurting. And then I saw him, Brandon. He was sitting in the very last row of the lecture hall, one leg propped up on the seat in front of him, headphones on, eyes drifting lazily toward the window. The kind of person you only need one glance at to know. Outsider. Oversized black hoodie, slightly messy hair, and the way he simply existed as though he belonged to none of the rules of this place. I didn't know why I noticed him. Maybe because he was the only person in the room who didn't care that I had just walked in. Or maybe because in those eyes I recognized something familiar. A kind of loneliness I thought only I carried. I chose a seat 2 rows away from him, close enough to observe, far enough not to be noticed. The lecture dragged on. The professor said something about analyzing modern media, but my mind had wandered somewhere else entirely. I kept stealing glances at Brandon, little by little. He didn't take notes, didn't look at the board. Occasionally he'd curl the corner of his mouth, as if laughing at something only he could hear. Midway through class, the professor called out, "Brandon Hayes?" No response. "Mr. Hayes?" He slowly pulled one earbud out and turned his head. "Yeah. Would you like to share your thoughts on the reading?" A pause. I expected him to get scolded, but he didn't. Brandon stood up, tugged his hoodie down a little, and spoke, his voice low and unhurried, but clear. It's all noise. The class stirred. The professor frowned. "Excuse me? It's just people talking about people talking. Nobody actually says anything real." No one laughed. No one said a word. But I felt my heart beat 1 count faster. Something in the way he said it, blunt, unbothered by anyone's approval, made me feel pulled toward him. After class, I packed up my things more slowly than usual. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because I was waiting. Brandon was the last one to leave. As he walked past me, I said, almost on reflex, "Hey." He stopped. His eyes landed on me, not friendly, not unfriendly, just neutral, but very deep. "Yeah." I swallowed. "What you said earlier was pretty good." He shrugged. "I just said what I thought." "Yeah. But not everyone has the guts to." A small silence. Then he asked, "Are you the kind of person who tells the truth?" That question caught me off guard. Me, Oliver, always well-liked, always knowing how to say what people want to hear, suddenly didn't know how to answer. "Maybe. Depends on the moment," I said. Brandon smiled faintly. A very slight smile, but enough to change his whole face. "Then you're still performing." That should have stung. But somehow, it felt true. "And you don't perform?" I asked. He held my gaze for a moment longer, as if weighing something. "No," he said, "I just don't care what people think." Then he turned and walked away. That was all. No goodbye. No looking back. But I stood there, in the long corridor of the lecture hall, and realized something very clearly. I wanted to know more about him. Not the ordinary kind of curiosity, but the kind where you look at someone and you sense that they will change your life somehow, for better or worse. That night, I lay on my dorm bed staring at the ceiling, and somehow, the image in my head was no longer my ex. It was Brandon. The way he said, "It's all noise." The way he looked at me as if he could see straight through the shell I had spent years building. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something dangerous. Not pain, but curiosity. I was never the type to chase after someone. At least not before I met Brandon. At school, everything always unfolded in a very predictable order. I'd show up at a party and someone would start a conversation. I'd post a photo and someone would text me. I'd smile at someone in class and they'd remember my name before I had the chance to remember theirs. But Brandon was different. He was like a dead zone, a place where every social rule I knew simply didn't apply. 3 days after that lecture, I spotted him again, this time at the basketball court behind the dorm. Late afternoon, the sunlight stretching long shadows across the court, the wind carrying the smell of dry grass. Brandon was playing alone, not for fun. He was throwing the ball hard, sharp, deliberate, as though pouring something out of himself. I stood at the fence and watched for a while. He missed a shot, swore under his breath, retrieved the ball, threw again. I didn't know what I was doing there. Maybe I just wanted to confirm he was real, not some strange apparition I'd invented to take my mind off the breakup. Seen enough? His voice carried over and he didn't turn around. I startled. You've been standing there for 5 minutes, Brandon said, still dribbling. Either come play or go somewhere else. I walked onto the court. Let me play with you, I said. He glanced at me. You any good? Decent. Decent usually means terrible. Then you've got an easy win. Brandon's lip curved. Fine. 1-on-1. We started. And I lost. Not by a little. By a lot. Brandon moved fast and sharp with a kind of focus I rarely saw. He didn't talk much while playing, he just acted. When the game ended, I bent over with my hands on my knees, catching my breath. Okay, I laughed. You're genuinely good. Yeah, he replied simply, drinking water. A pause. I sat down beside the court. Do you play here often? Sometimes. Why don't you join the school team? Brandon shook his head. I don't do well with rigid rules. Basketball has rules. Yeah. But out here, if I break them, nobody cares. I looked at him. Are you always like this? Like what? Not caring. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then, in a lower voice, it's not that I don't care. Then what is it? It's not believing that caring changes anything. That answer didn't sound like something said offhandedly. It sounded like something carried for a long time. I didn't push further. Instead, I said, I'm Oliver. I know. I was slightly surprised. You know me? Brandon shrugged. Whole school knows you. Because I'm the heartthrob? I smiled, half joking. He looked at me. This time, longer than usual. Yeah, Brandon said, and because you're always smiling. I didn't know why. That landed a little uncomfortably. Is smiling a bad thing? No, he said. Just. Sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones hiding the most. I went still. He couldn't know. There was no way. You talk like you understand me, I said, keeping my voice even. Brandon stood up, picked up the ball. I don't understand you, he said. I'm just guessing. And what are you guessing? He turned back, looked straight at me. That you're trying to be whoever people want you to be. 1 heartbeat. 2. I laughed, but the sound came out. Hollow. That sounds very philosophical. No, Brandon said. Just an observation. Then he tossed me the ball. Rematch? I caught it and looked at him. Do you always talk like this? I asked. Like what? Like you can read people's minds. No, he shrugged. Just with you. I didn't know how to respond to that. So I just said, okay. Rematch. We played another round. And this time, I still lost. But somehow I didn't mind at all. In fact, I felt lighter. As if. Around Brandon, I didn't need to win. Didn't need to be perfect. Afterward, we sat in silence for a while. The evening breeze had grown cooler, and the sunlight was slowly fading. What's your major? I asked. Psychology. Psychology? I raised an eyebrow. Fits you. Because I like reading people? Yeah. Brandon shook his head. No. Because I want to understand. Why I am the way I am. That sentence was light, but heavy. I didn't ask what the way I am meant. Because I had a feeling. If I did, I'd be stepping into something deeper than I bargained for. What about you? He asked. Communications. Makes sense, Brandon said. You're good at talking. I smiled. You just said I was performing. Yeah. But performing is a form of communication. I looked at him and shook my head. You really are. Strange. You're still here, he replied. Yeah. So you must be strange too. I laughed. This time. It was real. A comfortable silence settled between us. Not awkward. Nothing to fill. Just existing. When it was nearly dark, Brandon stood up. I'm heading out. Yeah, I said. See you around? He looked at me for a second. Maybe. What does maybe mean? It means if you happen to show up wherever I am. So I have to follow you around? Brandon's lips curved. You can try. Then he turned and left. I watched the shape of his back until it disappeared around the corner of the building. And I realized something. I was no longer wondering whether I should approach him. I was already drawn in. Not because he was easy to be around, but precisely because he was so hard to pin down. And something in me, a part one had been suppressing for a long time, was quietly waking up every time I was near Brandon. That night, I didn't stay in my room. I went back to the basketball court. Not to practice, but because I hoped he might be there again. I went back to that basketball court that night, and the night after. I know how that sounds, but I was never someone comfortable with not knowing. Not knowing where Brandon was, not knowing when I'd see him again, not knowing whether what was between us was actually something, or just a few random moments I was blowing out of proportion. On the third night, just as I was about to give up, he appeared. Not at the court. At the library. I was sitting on the second floor, surrounded by a stack of books I wasn't really reading. Headphones on, but the music had been off for a while. I was just pretending to be busy. Then I saw him walk in. Brandon didn't belong in a library. He moved through it like the place wasn't meant for him, hands tucked in the pocket of his hoodie, eyes scanning the room with mild boredom. But eventually he chose a table in the corner, not far from mine. I hesitated for about 10 seconds, then stood up. You're following me, aren't you? He said it the moment I pulled out the chair and sat down across from him. I laughed. Confident of you. You've shown up in 2 places I've been in 3 days, he shrugged. Statistically suspicious. Or maybe I just have the same schedule as you. Are you a library person? Brandon raised an eyebrow. Sometimes. Don't believe you. Are you a library person? I turned it back on him. He paused, then said no. Then we're even. Brandon looked at me for a few more seconds. Then said nothing. Just opened his laptop. I sat quietly too. The strange thing was the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't the silence of strangers searching for something to say. It was like 2 people who understood that saying nothing was perfectly fine. About 15 minutes later, I broke the quiet. Are you studying? Yeah. Doesn't he really seem like you? How long have you known me? 3 days. Then don't pretend to know me, Brandon said. I still fixed on his screen. I shrugged. Fair. Another pause. Then he asked, without looking up, what do you actually want? I paused. What do you mean? You're not the type to sit here at 9 in the evening. Just to read books, Brandon said. So what do you want? I looked at him. That question was direct enough that I had nowhere to dodge. I want to talk to you, I answered. Brandon stopped typing. Finally looked up. Why? I don't know. That's a bad answer. I know, I smiled slightly. But it's the truth. He held my gaze for a moment, then closed his laptop. Okay, Brandon said. So talk. I blinked. What? You said you wanted to talk? He leaned back in his chair. So talk. You're making this feel like a lot of pressure. Life is already a lot of pressure, he shrugged. I exhaled, then just asked the first thing that came to mind. Do you have a best friend? He raised an eyebrow. That's your opening question? I told you I don't know where to start. Brandon thought for a moment. No, he said. I don't. You never did? I did, he replied. Not anymore. I didn't press. Something in his voice told me not to. What about you? Brandon asked back. I do, I said. Several. But? I smiled faintly. You really are a psychology major. Answer the question. I looked down at the table. But sometimes I still feel alone, I said quietly. Brandon didn't laugh, didn't make a remark. Just nodded very slightly. Yeah, he said. That tracks. I looked up. Doesn't that seem strange to you? What? Having a lot of people around you, but still feeling lonely. No, Brandon said. I think it's normal. Why? Because most people don't actually see each other, he said. They only see the version the other person lets them see. I was quiet. That hit something very deep. What version do you think I show people? I asked. Brandon looked at me. This time. It wasn't just observation in his eyes. It was something closer to understanding. The agreeable version, he said. Easy to be around. No complications. Never makes anyone uncomfortable. That sounds fine. Yeah, he nodded. But it's not real. I bit my lip. I don't know what my real version is, I admitted. Brandon tilted his head. Are you sure you don't know? Or are you just too afraid to let anyone see it? I didn't answer. Because I knew the answer. And I didn't like it. A longer silence this time. Then I changed the subject. Have you ever had a boyfriend or girlfriend? Brandon looked at me like I'd said something very interesting. You got there fast. I'm just curious. About me. Or about your own chances. I laughed. You think I'm flirting with you? No, Brandon said. I think you're trying to figure out whether you should. I stopped. He wasn't joking at all. I started, but didn't know how to finish. Brandon's lips curved. Relax, he said. I'm not easy to pursue. You're very sure of yourself. No, he shook his head. I just don't trust people easily. I looked at him. So, if someone wanted to try? Brandon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The distance between us shortened just slightly. Then that person would have to be very patient, he said quietly. My heart beat faster. I can be patient, I replied, almost on instinct. A pause. Brandon looked straight into my eyes. Then he smiled clearly for the first time. We'll see, he said. And somehow, those two words made me feel both excited and afraid. Because for the first time I understood. This was no longer just curiosity. This was the beginning of something real. After that night at the library, everything between me and Brandon didn't explode the way it would in a romantic movie. No constant texting. No clear-cut dates. Just those accidental encounters which I gradually began to realize weren't entirely accidental anymore. We kept running into each other at the same places. The basketball court, the library, the small cafe near campus. Nobody said let us meet, but both of us kept showing up, and each time we talked a little more. Another layer peeled back. Another piece revealed. One Friday evening, I was sitting at our usual cafe corner window seat, a latte growing cold in my hands when Brandon walked in. No hoodie, no headphones, just a simple gray t-shirt, and his hair still slightly messy as always. He spotted me immediately, paused for a second, then walked over. You're starting to make me feel genuinely followed, Brandon said, pulling out the chair across from me. I was here first, I shrugged. If anyone's following anyone, it's you. Maybe, he said. Or maybe we're both just looking for reasons to see each other. I didn't answer right away, just smiled. What do you want to drink? I asked. Black coffee. That bitter? Used to it. I stood and went to order for him. When I came back, Brandon was looking out the window, the streetlights reflected in his eyes, making them look softer than usual. I set the coffee down in front of him. Thanks. No problem. We sat in silence for a while, but not an awkward silence. More like both of us thinking. Oliver, Brandon said suddenly. Yeah. Have you ever felt like you're living a life that isn't to yours? The question came quickly and it went deep. I didn't sidestep it. Yes, I said. Many times. For example, I looked down at my coffee. For example. When people expect me to be a certain person, I said slowly. And I just keep playing that role because it's easier than explaining who I actually am. Brandon nodded slightly. Yeah, he said. Makes sense. What about you? He smiled faintly. I'm the opposite. The opposite? I've always been myself, Brandon said. And because of that, I don't belong anywhere. That sentence made me feel something like pain. Not my own pain, but pain on his behalf. Don't you think there's someone out there who'll accept you? I asked. Brandon looked at me. His eyes this time were different. Not guarded. Not sardonic. Just very honest. Maybe, he said. But I haven't met them. My heart beat a little faster. I could be that person, I said, almost without thinking. A silence, longer than any before. Brandon didn't answer right away. Just looked at me, as if searching for something in my eyes. How many people have you said that to? He asked. That question was like a soft slap. I've never said that to anyone, I replied, my voice quieter. But you're the kind of person who makes others feel special, Brandon said. That's your skill. You think I'm using a skill on you? I don't know, he shrugged. I just don't want to be one of many. I took a slow breath. You're not, I said. Prove it. I hesitated. How? Brandon leaned back in his chair. Don't try to make me like you, he said. Just be yourself. I smiled softly. That's the hardest thing you could ask. Then start with something easier, Brandon raised an eyebrow. Which is, stop smiling when you don't want to smile. I was quiet, because he was right. I was smiling, and I wasn't sure I actually wanted to. I dropped my gaze, stopped smiling. A strange, hollow feeling surfaced. See, Brandon said quietly, you didn't die. I laughed this time genuinely. You really are. A lot. You're still here, he replied. Yeah. A pause. But this time it felt different. Closer. Warmer. Brandon, I said. Yeah. I've never told anyone this before. He said nothing. Just waited. I paused. Then continued. I like guys. The air seemed to slow down for a moment. Brandon didn't look surprised. Didn't ask me to repeat it. Just nodded. Okay. That was all. Okay. I frowned. Yeah, he shrugged. What reaction were you expecting? I don't know. I don't either, Brandon said. But thank you for telling me. I looked at him. What about you? A pause. Then Brandon said simply, same. My heart seemed to miss a beat. Really? Yeah. I didn't know what to say next. I just felt something inside me open up. Not quite relief, but something more like a door. And on the other side, Brandon. He looked at me, his eyes softer than they'd ever been. Things are going to get more complicated now, Brandon said. Why? Because now you have a real reason to pursue me. I smiled. And what will you do? Brandon tilted his head. We'll see. How patient you can be. I looked at him, and for the first time what I felt wasn't just curiosity. It was wanting. Something clearer. More dangerous. But also more real than anything I'd ever had.